Hi, everyone. Nice to see you here. Wow, it's been like 2 years since I was in front of a live audience. Show of hands, for how many people is this your first big conference in person? Okay, about half the room, half the room. Well, thank you for coming. Just take this over here. So my name is Jane Wong. I'm the Vice President of Security Products at Splunk. And this is Wissam.
Yeah, Wissam. Yes, Wissam Ali Ahmad. I am a lead architect on our with Partner Solutions and working with AWS for a few years now. Take it away, Jane.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to start with a little on what we're hearing from customers, big problems they're facing that you all are probably facing, and how Splunk can help. And then Wissam is going to do a very deep technical dive and show how some of these solutions come together with AWS. So these numbers are from the State of Security report that Splunk put out this year. If you haven't had a chance to check this out, please do. I doubt much will be surprising here. It probably all seems very familiar. Customers told us that when the pandemic began, really tightly resourced teams just had a massive challenge because the attack surface expanded. Now they had to secure remote access to corporate systems for folks working from home. That really stretched teams that were already stretching, even more so. And many of our customers are moving to the cloud. And this isn't as simple as, flip the switch. Moving to the cloud introduces, again, an expanded attack surface, right? New APIs, new workloads, new services to manage and secure in the cloud. And customers don't just flip the switch and move to the cloud overnight. They may move some services and workloads over, but have a lot on-prem or customer managed too. So it's a hybrid situation. So again, this increases complexity for already overstretched teams. So within AWS, the security of the cloud, right? So your infra is secure, your facilities, security in the cloud becomes even more critical. And many security teams I talk to tell us they just don't have enough visibility into what services and workloads are being run in the cloud, who has access to them, how that access changes over time. These are things we're focused on helping customers with. So a lot of common challenges that we hear over and again, and these may resonate with you. So too many alerts. As customers buy new security tools to expand coverage across the cloud, their alert volume goes up. So security operations teams, frontline folks, are just drowning in alerts. For folks who use enterprise security from Splunk, if you haven't looked at risk-based alerting, that is really helping many of our customers deal with this alert volume by tying what might be single atomic alerts together into one overarching alert so they can help detect the whole pattern of an attack. But this is a real problem. So like a volume of alerts, alert fatigue, we're hearing from across our customers, and that's why we've been working on that. Limited resources. So I'm sure you're very aware of the global shortage of security talent. We had a customer, CISO CAB, 2 weeks ago, and every single CISO on that customer advisory board told us that they really wanted to talk about how other CISOs are doing in attracting and retaining talent, because they're all struggling with this. And they put that as the #1 thing they want to talk about ahead of any other system. So clearly a big problem there. Too many siloed products. So this makes time to detect and remediate take longer because products are not integrated and processes within the Security Operations Center are disjointed, manual, error-prone. Teams are too stretched thin to even write down their processes. And many are not automating. So automation is really the only way to solve some of these challenges. That is not happening with many customers. And that leads to analyst burnout because really smart frontline analysts are having to spend a lot of time doing manual repetitive tasks. And it's taking them way too long to effectively detect and then quickly remediate threats. So at Splunk, we're very, very focused on helping customers reap maximum value from their data. So for 10 years before I came to Splunk, I worked at a control point company across email, endpoint, network controls. Control points fail, right? Miss things. Splunk is really, really excellent at helping customers look across their data and find smart insights, run analytics for smart insights and discovery to help detect those threats that control points may have missed. So the more traditional way of responding to these threats just isn't working anymore. Again, too many separate tools, lack of integration, especially with third-party tools for many customers, manual repetitive tasks. At Splunk, we're really focused on bringing things together so that security analysts can detect, investigate, and respond all from one central workspace. So this summer, we released Splunk Security Cloud in June. We're very, very proud of this. So we pulled together smart analytics, including behavioral machine learning-driven analytics focused on inside a threat. That is in preview right now. It's part of Enterprise Security, our Enterprise Security SIEM product. Also, security operations. We took our SOAR product to the cloud. It had previously been the acquisition of Phantom, was only on-prem or customer managed. Now it's in the cloud. So that's part of Splunk Security Cloud. Integrated threat intelligence. So we acquired a tip called TrueStar, and we're fully integrating that into Enterprise Security, our SIEM and our SOAR. So any alert in the SIEM will be already enriched with many different sources of intelligence. Open source, freemium feed, ISACs, ISAL, any paid feeds that you might use. We'll bring those in, rationalize, dedupe, and apply them at source in a fully integrated way to every alert that your SIEM, Enterprise Security, might detect and raise up. So there's no separate step where analysts have to go out one at a time and look at third-party data sources. They'll be fully integrated. And then the last thing is an ecosystem. So Splunk is really, really committed to maintaining and continuing to be the kind of Switzerland of third-party control points. So we integrate with many. We just at .conf released really deep technical integrations with Zscaler, Mandiant, and DTEX. And these are not just logo swaps or sales, marketing announcements. There's deep technical integration. Engineers wrote code to make those integrations really work smoothly and very easy for customers to use. Again, the whole goal here is helping customers reduce mean time to detect and mean time to respond. So shrinking that time through deep integration. And we're very proud to be able to offer this all as a partner with AWS. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Wissam so he can dive into a deeper technical demo.
All right. Thank you, Jane. Feels good to take off the mask. I see all your smiles behind these masks. Okay, so Splunk has been a long-time partner with AWS, several years, more than 6. And then we work together on a lot of the use cases, which I will be demonstrating soon, and then some of the services and offerings together. And you can get, Splunk Cloud also is running on AWS, and you can also get Splunk running in the marketplace, and also SOAR, our SOAR product as well. So what you can do with the AWS services and Splunk, right? Think of AWS data sources as the sensors, sensory data coming in from your environment, and think of Splunk as the analytics engine, right? So you get the sensor data, that's your gasoline. You still need an engine to run this, to run your security operations, right? So that's where we feed in. And today we integrate all that data you see here on the left side. It's actually ingested into Splunk through integrations we work together with AWS on. And on the right side, what you get out of that when you ingest that data into Splunk, you're gonna get use cases, as Jane mentioned, around investigation, around monitoring, around action. How do I take action on that data and act, investigate, monitor, and alert, and basically also analyze. Analyze is the analytics part of it. So with that, you're gonna have, looking at attack vectors, especially when they are mapped to the MITRE framework. You're gonna be able to have one centralized system that you can rely on to do all your security operation. And that system is what Jay mentioned is Splunk Cloud Security. And automation is number one. I want to automate my analytics. I want to automate my monitoring, my alerting. I want to automate also my actions and my remediations and mitigation. And these AWS data sources really are almost, if not, quote unquote, embedded, right? Very well integrated with Splunk products across our security portfolio to a point that you get a lot out of that data, even including things like Security Hub and GuardDuty. And we'll talk about that a little more, what's possible to do with those sources. And not only as part of our core products, which are the Splunk Analytics and Splunk SOAR, but also if you look here on the right and left side, this is where we talk about content. Content is where you have to write rules, searches, playbooks, any of that content actually we write as well as Splunk, and we have a team, a great, awesome research team who specializes in writing security content. Anytime you hear of a new ransomware or an attack, supply chain attack, that team produces content in the form of what we call content updates. So when you get today the SIM from Splunk, the Security Analytics SIM, you will also get free subscription to that content. And that content also, of course, applies to AWS data sources. And on the right side, we have content produced by partners. So our own partners write also as well their own integrations in the form of add-ons or playbooks or apps for our SOAR product. And on the bottom, we're just highlighting some of the key data sources, AWS data sources and services that today we leverage for that content for let's say the top security attacks that are common, especially the ones that map to MITRE framework. So the very four things I always like to highlight today that are really useful in order to apply good security analytics with AWS data is GuardDuty. That's going to produce for you instant alerts of what's going on in your environment. VPC flow logs, as you know, if I'm investigating, I want to be able to look at all the traffic logs related to a certain attack so I can actually trace where this attack is going, right? At what cycle of MITRE this attack is happening. You have some attack starts with just pounding the port, but sometimes there's other things going on. They could be, already, compromise the machine, and they're doing other traffic coming out of that, going to another country, for example. So you want to look at that data sources, analyze that as well. CloudTrail is very important, give you that trail of what's happening from, especially on your assets. I have a user who's actually doing things with using a key. You have unauthorized access from another country. So you can actually correlate that CloudTrail data with other sources, all in Splunk. And Security Hub, of course, is the hub of all these alerts coming in on the AWS side. But still, this is AWS giving you what's going on, alerting you what they're seeing on their services. You still want to bring that alert into Splunk and analyze it further to look at things like when there's a risk score with the assets. So you can deterministically know that this is an actual attack, and helps you make a decision what to do next with that environment. Typically, how the data flows into Splunk, we have what we call technology add-on. These add-ons, think of them like adapters or drivers that we develop at Splunk and we support. Or also as well, we have partners developing them. So typically, you have the typical pattern here of data ingest. Is, you have GuardDuty sending me these findings. They're coming into Security Hub. And then CloudWatch events, the standard way of sending those. We alert Splunk, and especially Splunk SOAR gets alerted when there's a new event, CloudWatch event, whether from GuardDuty or Security Hub. And that's triggered through an SQS queue. That's how Splunk SOAR gets notified. So it can act on that if they have a playbook for that. Otherwise, it goes to Splunk Enterprise Security Analytics side through Kinesis Data Firehose was our classic way to do that for a few years now. And also you can also do that with EventBridge as well. So this is kind of like the template of how today's data ingest happen from these sources, key sources for analytics and SOAR as well. So today, with Security Hub, I'm able actually to aggregate the findings from AWS and any third party, and actually customize how these are sent to Splunk. So Security Hub, you don't have to ingest everything. You can actually customize using, on the add-on, you can have rules around that. And also, that's the kind of the entry point before you trigger CloudWatch event, as well as GuardDuty, as we mentioned. That's where the findings are a little bit lower level. They're more on across regions and accounts, more refined data. So you want to have both ingested into Splunk. So again, I'll show you now shortly how you're going to benefit from those as part of an investigation from an attack. So in this, as you can see, typically we talked about detection, aggregation, reporting, and action, right? So on the detection side, Security Hub and GuardDuty will be your detection, your alerting, your feed into Splunk, and then the Security Hub is another aggregator of alerts. But then how do I want to act on? That's where you get the CloudWatch events that will trigger into Splunk to tell you, okay, there's this incident now I have to look at, investigate, or maybe funnel that into Splunk SOAR for an automated action, remediation, and so on. So let's talk about the analytics side of things. So we're going to be talking about the analytics side with AWS and also the automation, SOAR, the orchestration also with AWS. So here I just outlined typical use cases, especially in cloud security. You have use cases around accounts, network, assets like hosts, and also compliance. So use case one, I want to be able to protect my accounts. How do I go about that? So basically, the drivers and the add-ons that we provide give you all the essential mapping from these data sources. And also the content that you get with Splunk Enterprise Security gives you all the correlation searches that you need in order to quickly trigger more advanced detections that map to MITRE and so on. So in the case of account protection, I want to make sure I have CloudTrail enabled, configured into Splunk, GuardDuty as well. And with those, I'm going to get these mapped into what we call CIM. CIM is a Splunk information, think of it like a taxonomy of security data and structured in a model called Common Information Model. And when these data ingested into Splunk, we map them to that Common Information Model. That's a way to normalize that data. And once that data is normalized, you can actually reuse it over and over again in many different dashboards and apps, especially these apps and dashboards leveraging the CIM model. And the number one app that we have or solution at Splunk is called Splunk Enterprise Security, is our SIM. It's all based on CIM. So you'll have AWS data, you'll have other third-party data, all coming into ES, Enterprise Security, and then all mapping into the general dashboards for, let's say, IDS or for malware detections and so on. You can able to map those. So that's here we're showing in this table how this AWS data mapped into which CIM model that we have today. And once that mapping is successful and you have it available and compatible, then now you can trigger detections. On the right side, you see here, we have detections that are triggering around AWS account protection in the enterprise security use case library. And other ones with GuardDuty findings. So when you have a GuardDuty finding, that can easily trigger what we call a notable event in ES. And then you can write a correlation around that finding to correlate other data sources as well so that you can get more refined investigation. This is another use case. is your assets, the compute, right? Compute instances. So here, things like port scanning, how can I detect there's a spike of activity? So with analytics in Splunk, you can actually write rules that detect certain spike in activities in the last few minutes. Or you can look at different regions, multiple regions in AWS, and you can see potentially global attack happening in your environment because you have all that data. And in that case, VPC flow logs come handy. They are mapped into the network traffic model in CIM, and that will trigger these content and correlations in ES. CloudTrail is interesting. You can look at change analysis. If someone all of a sudden, an account privilege changed, and now we see spike of API activity happening on a compute instance that they're not supposed to have access to. Maybe they're trying to spawn multiple instances, and that's your typical attack for crypto mining, right? You can compromise, you can take over someone's infrastructure and use it to do crypto mining. And that's how you can detect that changes. You can go back while investigating what happened to trail, who made this change of activity or authentication that caused this attack to happen. And this is an example, just some detection. We have about 50 or more even, just detections around compute instances that you can actually leverage yourself as a customer. You can take those rules and rewrite them as well. And these are all part of the free content that we offer with ES. Example of that, I can detect whether an EC2 instance was modified by a previously unseen user. I can see if an compute instance was also showed up in an unseen region. All of a sudden, EC2 instance was moved to another region or spun off in a different region that they're not supposed to be in. GuardDuty is going to give us also more interesting like radar sensory data, right? I take that as trusting AWS, tell me something in my AWS environment. But also, as we know, there's a shared model. So you're still, as a customer, responsible for your own compute instances, but the GuardDuty data is one indicator something going on that's not right. So you take those and you trigger them as they are into Splunk Enterprise Security, and then you can correlate them and you leverage frameworks in enterprise security like risk and threat intelligence to do more with these findings. Compliance is a big thing in cloud security and cloud configurations. And as we know, Security Hub offers a lot of those, and these can come in as alerts. And then these can be mapped into things like, as we know, data protection, right? Is my data protected? Is my bucket configured correctly? Things like along those lines. And network, is the VPC network is configured properly, and who's changing it, and who's moving it around. On the CloudTrail side, we also have change detections and authentications and things around IAM compliance. These are all also can be, of course, ingested and trigger these detections in Splunk Enterprise Analytics around ownerships and assets, especially assets. Assets is a key thing that ES rules are based on, because now you can attach a score to these assets, whether they're identity, human asset, or compute asset, or it could be a network segment. Rules, configuration rules, of course, these are also as well ingested into Splunk, and you can actually nicely map them into an investigation workbench and compare that with the other data that you see in your environment that you can ingest as well. You could have CrowdStrike data at the endpoint, and you can have AWS data and other things in Splunk, all those at your fingertips, so you can analyze and look at things around configuration and out of compliance configurations. Okay, so let me actually want to show you a quick demo. We're going to switch screens. There we go. So what we're looking at here, this is the SSRF attack in MITRE. This is the server, forgery attack, typical. And this is how you can detect it using Splunk. We have data here from CloudTrail. from GuardDuty and Security Hub, and we put together a dashboard here that shows us what's happening in my environment, right? So first of all, using Splunk, I'm able to quickly create this geomap of all my activities in my environment. And I can quickly see that I have a spike of data, of activities, API and user activity in my environment coming from Eastern Europe and also from China. And actually, I can map and write a Splunk rule, a search rule, to tell me what's the top country right now that's sending traffic over. And here we see here, I have the highest number of traffic coming in from China on port 22. And then, so now I have this, so I want to be able to look more. That's why I will rely on Security Hub and GuardDuty. And they're telling me that, yes, there's some AWS controls that being messed with. There's some instances being spawned in other areas, security groups being changed. So things are happening not normal in my environment. I need to look at more. And this is where we look at the CrowdTrail activity as well. So all that's happening around that time, and I'm able to here quickly look at the EC2 instances, what kinds of instances that are spawned, maybe some weird OS we haven't seen before, and so on and so on, and some Lambda here is all happening. So this is kind of like a snapshot that I can use. That's the monitor. This is kind of like, think of it, analytics used as part of detections and monitoring for attacks. Now, in Splunk Enterprise Security, it takes everything you see in these dashboards, think of them, I can actually write them as a rule, so I don't have to look at dashboard because we don't have enough people in our team. We want to be able to automate the detections and automate the alerting. And that's where ES is useful. In ES, we have something called incident detections. And as an investigator, you can always go back and look at them. But every detection you see here is driven by the mapping of assets to risk scores. So in enterprise security, recently we have this, about a year and a half ago, we introduced more emphasis on risk-based scoring, a framework that you define your most important assets that you have in your environment, whether they're identity users or hosts or instances. You define them, you give them a score. And then ES will look at that data and the correlation with that data and compute a score for you based on the severity of the detection and possibly the attack. And what's beautiful here, you see in ES, I'm actually quickly see the MITRE. I can see the MITRE attacks. Here there are 3 actually happening with this detection. So this is part of that content I talked about. So our research team wrote the content saying, if you see these events and they're triggered, you have high potential that this is a MITRE attack of type this and ID this. This is very powerful. It's free for you, available if you have ES today. And what's cool here, if I want to get explanation what this risk score is about, I have a workbench. I can go quickly, and this is like what we call embedded workbench. And so ES quickly is showing me why this is in red, right? So it actually showed me here the raw events coming in from AWS IAM events. This is my user Frothly. It's been compromised, the key here. And this is the score that ES gave us. So that means now I need to act on this. This is really important. So it's not, as we know, GuardDuty and Security Hub, it can be noisy, right? There's a lot going on there. They do have severities and stuff attached to those findings, but what it doesn't have is all the other stuff that you already have ingested in Splunk that AWS does not see, like threat intelligence, like the risk scoring, like other data sources, like maybe endpoint, like CrowdStrike and so on. And so we see that data and even like Zscaler, right, Zero Trust. We have that data already in Splunk, and you can compute better affinity on the scores, therefore more certainty, right, on this detection that I should act on. That's the question we all want to do. Like, I want to automate the detection and automate the response. part of automating detection and response is knowing whether you want to act on it. And if you don't have a good scoring, you don't have a good way to score these incidents, you're going to end up looking at 1,000 incidents a day. And this is what ES and analytics really is helping you to do here with the AWS data. This is very key here. Here I want to show you the content. We talked a lot about content. This is the content that you get today with enterprise security, and all of it's free. I can just search for it, and you can see here I have 152 rules that related with AWS. So there are 152 correlation searches right now out of the box that you can rely on to use to trigger things in ES for automated detections. This is it. Let's look at deep dive. This is a deep dive of one rule. This is basically leveraging CloudTrail to look at events where a user has permission to create access keys and make an API call. So this is one rule that you can actually leverage in an environment to look at that user activity. And then you can see here we have the MITRE ATT&CK corresponding for that rule. And we have the risk analysis, right? The scoring. So this content, this is the content I'm talking about. It consists of all this. And that's the content that gets pushed to you as customers of Splunk Security Cloud. And you get that all the time. So anytime there's a new vector, a new attack that you hear about in the news, our research team will put out these correlation searches literally within a few days. And this is another display of what we call use case library. So that same content is also published in the form of what we call analytic story. Analytic story typically is, I have a detection, so it consists of a rule of detection, and also the mapping. So this is the detection searches that will consist of this story. You know, anything around cross-account activity, these are detections I need to make sure I enable in my environment. And this is it will also have, these analytic story will have mitigative actions. It tells you what you need to trigger to take action, maybe disable an account, and so on. So that's it for the analytics part. Let's jump now, talk about the SOAR. So let's jump back to the slides. Thank you. So SOAR, as we know, is security orchestration, automation, response. And that's where we want to automate the response aspect, right? We talked about automating the detection aspect, now the response. And that's done using, here, the box, green, black, that's SOAR. That's our Splunk SOAR product, formerly known as Phantom. And it sits right there, right next to Splunk Enterprise Security. So you don't actually need ES to use SOAR, but it's definitely a major complement together. Because think about it, before I want to act, I want to make sure that the analytics engine, with the risk scoring that we just talked about, it's actually telling me that, yes, this is a high severity, it's greater than 75% score, you really need to act on it. So if I'm confident with my rules and all the tuning I've done, and have all the right correlation searches enabled, I can pretty much with confidence enable the ES to send a message to SOAR. And in SOAR, I will have these tags saying anytime I see a notable event from enterprise security, trigger this playbook. So you do the mapping from playbooks to notables in SOAR. And that's where this is kind of the life cycle of a typical response, automated response. Detection coming from AWS or other third party. Analytics, that's a decision making, right? I want to know, should I act on this detection or not? That's the analysis and correlation. And then comes after that the action. The action is where we modify the environment. And Splunk SOAR has all the APIs, have about 300 apps for all the security tools out there that you have between, you name it, all the vendors, literally all the like top 200 vendors, we have apps integrations with. So that means you can modify a firewall, you can quarantine a device, you can shut down VPN, you can disable a user, delete the key. All that can be done with SOAR in the form of a playbook. This is an example for AWS playbook, AWS app. So an app in the world of SOAR, basically it's a collection of API calls. So we already know the APIs. We have a team who already researched the API calls, for example, for WAF, right? So we have WAF, we have Security Hub, Inspector. All these are sending us signals into SOAR, but also at the same time, we can send them back API calls. So in the case of Security Hub, after the playbook happens, Security Hub gives you the ability to write what we call notes. So actually, the playbook can write back to Security Hub findings saying, yes, this was mitigated. So Splunk SOAR is actually writing back into Security Hub, adding a note to your finding that, yeah, oh, we took care of this. So this is pretty cool, actually. And there's more. So you can see all these apps are actually on our Phantom website. And actually, as of a few weeks ago, our own Splunk base, the marketplace for Splunk, also now includes SOAR apps. So you can go and search for SOAR apps also on our marketplace. Use cases, example of use cases. Again, a couple use cases, one around accounts, one around instances. These I always like to talk about around cloud security. Security Hub, I use Security Hub as my signal. So that's my radar alerting me something happening. And this signal is actually going directly into Phantom or SOAR. So this is, we're showing an example how even without ES, you can still manage to automate findings coming from Security Hub. In this case, Security Hub tells me there's a threat happening, potential threat, with an exposed EC2 instance. Someone exposed EC2 instance with like several ports open, or maybe the VPC configuration was not properly tightened up. Security Hub sends the finding via CloudWatch. The CloudWatch actually triggers an SQS event. SOAR is listening to that SQS queue for all these events, and quickly will act on that. On the 2 is the decision. Now SOAR, the engine now have to take action, right? So this is where we start with looking at so this is where your playbook now starts, number 2. The playbook has steps. Let's see if I have a picture. Yeah, here's the picture. So the playbook, this is the typical playbook in SOAR. And this is a little bit outdated screenshot because the new interface in SOAR is actually more beautiful. You have to check that out, the demo. You can actually, by the way, download Splunk SOAR for free. We have a community edition. You can download and play with it. You have about 100 events a day. And then this is the horizontal playbook display. Anyway, every step you see here is actually, it's a call to an API via the app, like the SOAR app. So here when we say list all accounts, there's an app for AWS IAM that's actually been called by the playbook, right, by the SOAR engine. And here I'm doing all that calculation. So back here, so this is what's happening. Step 2 is the playbook, the EC2 configuration. I'm getting all my connection information because I want to know what's this EC2 instance, who's connecting to it, right? So I can do all those steps in SOAR. And I can also as well automate the creation of a service ticket, ServiceNow and what have you. I can automate that as another step in my playbook. I can also send a Slack message to like a IT help desk or our security team and notify also the team, right? You always have a human element that you want to notify even when you automate a response. And then at the end, what is the actual action at the end, like the result of the playbook? In this case, we are actually going to isolate this EC2 instance, so we'll modify the security group, or maybe we add a tag that will cause this instance to be isolated, because now we determine after all these steps that's gone in the playbook that this is potentially, it's compromised. Here's another playbook idea. is disabling inactive user accounts. So you have stale accounts in there, maybe with a lot of privilege, high privilege, and you're kind of concerned that someone can actually take over this account and use it maliciously. So you actually can go and query these inactive accounts and do that as part of automated playbook as well. So here's very simply, I'm actually looking at all the accounts and their activity, and I'm using here what we call custom function, which is a special Python. You can actually write any box you see here, there's Python code behind it. And Splunk Sword gives you the ability to actually edit that code and modify it to your need. So in this case, I have a custom function. In the middle here, that's as a decision point. I'm deciding from all these accounts, when was the last time they logged in? And now I have a list of how many are not used, and I can quickly save it into what we call an artifact, so I can act on it later. And now I'll go back here, look at all the artifacts, all the users are not, and then quickly disable them. So this is kind of like this programming. Basically, it's programming, but very visual, in a visual manner, right? We give you all the building blocks you need, and you can put them together, and now you have this whole thing as, as an automated response that you can do. Okay, so let's talk about, just to recap. So we talked about, with AWS, we have resources out there. You can go on Splunk.com and get all the resources you need with what we're doing with AWS as far as the partnership, joint integrations, solutions. You go on this link, learn about security analytics, why security analytics is essential for part of your monitoring and detection, and with AWS as well. So some of the use cases I mentioned, look at the content that's being put out there for AWS use cases. And SOAR, as I mentioned, you can actually download it. You can download it for free from this URL. And you can learn more about Splunk on the AWS marketplace as well. And please, if you have any questions after this and you want to learn more about what we're doing with AWS, we actually have demo pods in our booth. Our booth is right when you walk into the expo hall. You're going to see us on the left, I think booth number 476. And we have a team there giving demos on all these things we do with AWS. And you have any questions about Splunk as well, please stop by. Feel free to ask us. And if you want, we're here. We'll hang out for another 5-10 minutes. If you have any questions, come up. And then thank you. Thank you so much.